Hello, everybody. Welcome to Everything in Moderation, the International Edition, episode 13. Unlucky 13, but we're always lucky to have these three here. So let's take it away. What are we talking about today, everyone?
Well, we're talking about international political spectrums today. So, what I mean by that is, what it means to be left or right in different countries, if it even really can be defined as left or right in certain countries, and just how, like, their political system is compared, I guess, to our own in America. Because it's definitely, some can definitely be very different. um, and just to start, we could talk about Poland is a good example. So Poland is a country coming from communism and a dictatorship, and you know that really affected them and their politics. But however, Poland in itself is always nationalist or has always been nationalist. So you can see a weird combination that you don't see very often, especially in the United States. So one example of this is one of the major political parties in Poland is considered very right wing and in their ideologies. So, like for example, they don't like immigration into the country is an example of like one of the right things that manifests in America, where you would see that that's similar, and the same thing with their war on drugs. They moreover see it as a crime. So, however, they have very left leaning policies as well. For example, one of the major reasons they are the biggest party in Poland currently, I'm totally blanking on the actual party name, right, by the way. But one of the reasons they are is because they give $500 every month to single families and families in general. So you wouldn't see that today in American politics, that kind of
UBI, baby.
combination. So that's just a curveball you'd see in other political institutions.
These are the Polish parties. I
It's
don't know.
funny how you mentioned Poland. It's just a fun fact. I don't know if it still occurs, but they usually have an annual cowboy kind of festival where they have like Reagan balloons and they eat like hamburgers and stuff, which obviously isn't from America. But you know what I mean? So in terms of nationalism and kind of having some similarities with the right here, they literally have kind of very stereotypical parades and festivals on America. It's just funny to see. For those viewers, you can look it up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add too. I read this recently that according to Gallup, Americans continue to lean more Democratic than Republican in their party identification, but there's still like an ideological balance that remains center right, with 37% of Americans identifying as conservatives during the 2019 year, and 35% as moderate, and 24% as liberal. So it's very interesting. Um,
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
well,
always say, and Eric on the other podcast always says that like Democrats aren't really like left; they're more like they're more center, if anything. But
Yeah.
like in the media, like you always have like Fox News calling the Democratic Party like the radical left, So um, I think that that's just like kind of the problem with media because then like you think that they're like communists, but in reality, like Joe Biden is not gonna hold a hammer and sickle in the hair.
well, that's a great point you make. I think media has a huge impact on and a huge showing on what that culture is because a lot of times people tend to reflect on the media or they tend to dissent it, depending on what it is. Fox News will say radical left, CNN will say white supremacist. It just goes back and forth, and then there's always going to be this moderate center. Being Democrat doesn't necessarily mean liberal, and there are also some people on the conservative end or Republican end that aren't conservative. So it really has its subcategories as well uh, when talking about the vision and unification.
yeah. I,
uh,
I was just gonna add too, like if you look at the past presidents, like in the past 30 years, you see that um, 5 out of the 7 presidents have been Republican. So I think that's just like a clear sign of how like I don't know, America is still leaning, center right, even if you still have self-identified Democrats.
Yeah,
Right. So
definitely. Another thing we have to also keep in mind when talking internationally that a lot of the issues that we can consider to be center right or left are not really like issues like the country cares about, right? Like for example, if we look at the Philippines right now, you see a really weird thing going on that's very different than America, and what that is, it's almost a what you'd call a unipolar nation when it comes to politics, because there is literally one issue the majority of Filipino people care about, and that is the war on drugs. Now, you guys probably heard of the president of the Philippines. I think his name's Toro. I don't know if I'm saying that right. um, but he literally has been leading death squads to go and gather drug users and drug dealers and literally kill them. They even have vigilante groups to do that as well. So that being the major reason why he got elected is pretty funny, because the Philippines history when it comes to their politics, it's usually centered around clans, and if you're part of one clan and this clan got elected, then the poor and middle class would see benefit, in their pockets for one, and members of other clans wouldn't. So it's very weird to think about, like, political parties and clans, right? But this is a reality in the Philippines. But right now it has all changed, and now it's very unipolar. So you see, you're going to see many presidents be elected and this be the major issue. That's why you see there's even death squads. This is such an issue that's so powerful for the Filipino people that they're willing to go that far. And, there's human rights issues involved, but they don't care. It's kind of that
we
kind of
have to ask
situation.
you have to ask the question on how this political culture forms, because although you have this unipolar system, as you mentioned, you know, you can see similarities between the Philippines and in other countries in which you consider authoritarian. Just because it's unipolar does not mean that all authoritarian governments are that way. In Mali right now, they have a situation. Well, actually, they have a military coup, but they're pretty recent on independence, and they've had a struggle on gaining parties that people can follow. They're like 300 parties, and people can't connect to them at all. So there's an issue there as well. So there are certain structures in government that could cause a lack of development, lack of democracy. So when we're talking about democracy, liberalism, you can look at it in this way. So it's good to ask these questions on how is it that a country that is unipolar and a country that has too many parties and can't decide between one, how they're so similar, when looking at political culture.
I have a question just to pose. Like, do you think that, like, we've seen a liberal like identification that has gradually increased in the country, especially after Donald Trump, but it's still the same thing under Barack Obama. And in every 2 years, we've seen like um, more people identifying as liberal. Do you think that can be connected in some sort of way to what you were saying, Patrick?
Yeah, and it connects to media, it connects to people. It also connects to people's understanding of government. When we use the term liberal, because I feel that there are a lot of people, especially when comparing the United States culture to many other countries, what liberal means. I think if you compare a conservative, like your basic conservative in the U.S., to that of in China or something that it has more of an authoritarian area, we're considered all liberal. So, I mean, if you look here, the issues are definitely more polarized, they're definitely smaller when we talk about social issues, because I believe that anybody wants people to have freedom in the country, to be treated respectfully. Like, these are liberal ideas, individualism. These are all ideas that the whole country unifies with. So I think when we use the word liberal in the US, it's very distinct to the US, because the US is much more liberal than, let's say, a lot of other countries. Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question.
I'll definitely say, like, wording like liberal, conservative, anything like that. That's a very American thing. They definitely name their parties, and like their viewpoints are really based on what's happened in the history of their country. Like for example, one of the reasons why you see those strange formations in Philippines and in Poland, that the two countries I mentioned that have various parties all over the place, and it's kind of you consider it disorganized. It's mostly because they just left communism. I mean, what, in the 80s the Soviet Union disbanded, and Poland and the Philippines were under that control. So you see the same type of corruption stay, because inherently that perversion of Marxism that was the Soviet Union was a right wing authoritarian regime in the end, and just is how we as Americans look at it. You could consider it the same as like Hitler's reign or anything in Italy, you know. So they're basically moving from there to a disorganized type of thing. It's not as organized as America. That's where you see the polarization happen, because even in England, for example, that country has been there for a while, and it is definitely pretty polarized. It's just two real major parties in England that control things there. But that you definitely see more parties and more disorganized nations. But sometimes more parties can be a good thing if there's less corruption. But I don't know
Yeah.
in any other circumstance.
Yeah, because you go, Christian.
I mean, I was looking at Germany's like government the other day. I was really bored, but and the way that like they get political parties get seats in their like Senate is similar to how it is here, but like their Senate is made up of a lot of different parties, whereas ours is just made out of two 2.1, because like libertarians have like I think one spot or two spots. So um you see more of like a percentage share of the pie in Germany, whereas like maybe the majority party holds like 20% of the seats. I mean this was like an older video, so like this might not be updated, but um you see more freedom of choice there. But the only thing is like especially with that is if that party won in like the prime minister seat or whatever. Um I'm not really too familiar with German politics, but that would be kind of strange in a way that if like okay, so 21% of the people like they represent 21% of the voting population. That's why they have 21% of the seats. So like now they're making policies for like 21% of the nation. They're supposed to make it for the 100%. So like it's a little like confusing in that way. Whereas like here you have the Democrats, you have the Republicans. So I think it encompasses more of a thing, like more of the country. But in the same breath, there's a lot of things that like I might agree with the Republican Party and then I disagree with them on certain other things. Whereas in smaller nations like Germany, you have that freedom of choice to get like someone that like really encompasses all of your ideals.
That's a really good point, actually, because the 2 points on one, you have multiple parties that can represent different areas. That's good because you can specify certain things. I agree. I have some agreements on the two extremely polarized parties here, but I wish there were more options to be able to identify yourself with. Then it's the other area too, where the U.S., even though it's polarized, you still have a lot of people voting in a lot of majority, for at least one president rather than the 20%. And I think we can go into Germany just a little bit more. I think it's an interesting comparison, especially with the words of the parties. Here we have Democrat Party and Republican Party. But then you have a lot of the top 5 parties in Germany. A lot of them had Democratic names. So Christian Democratic Union, which is interesting comparing it to the US because people identify Christianity and religion with kind of conservative values in the US. People tend to say that. If you're very conservative, you might be very religious. But then it has the word democratic, which is interesting. But then you also have Liberal Democratic Party, Democratic Farmers Party of Germany, National Democratic Party of Germany, and the Socialist Unity Party of Germany. I feel like in the U.S., people try to identify socialism at this point, Democrat and liberal, all in the same thing. So I think it's very an interesting comparison on how people identify there compared to here. Yeah, what is this?
I have the I brought
Yeah,
up
we need
party names
visuals.
and everything.
Yeah, but Christian Democrat Union is the number one. I think it's the most popular party there right now. Although others are coming up too.
Yes, yeah, so 200,
but
200. And then it even classes them too. So that's nice.
One thing I just wanted to bring up real quick, guys, and this is a question for the group. Do you think that powerful nations, like let's think China, the United States, um, Russia, do you think that their political systems, do they give the availability for a wide range of views, or is it pretty singular? Because in my view, I see that the most powerful nations in the world today have a very narrow form of politics. So, like for example, you consider American politics as center right, and like it's like this when you look at the spectrum. While like certain countries they have like an actual like fully socialist party, and then like okay, and then very conservative. Like for example, Finland has a system like that. Do you think that there's a reason for that?
I think it all has to do with this. It's like the chicken and the egg thing. The circulation between state and culture. State and culture. Here, a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans like to go to the Constitution. The Constitution has created our culture, but also our culture created the Constitution. We go back and forth on that. In China, you have a lot of the time the birth of the CCP and also connections to old dynasties. So that created and it's all about the people first, supposedly, although it's ironically not.
Just to butt in here, excuse me.
Yeah.
No, I'm writing a research paper about how the Mandate of Heaven, if you guys are familiar with that.
Yes.
How the Mandate of Heaven sort of shaped Chinese history and in turn their government today. And I think I have a pretty good argument for it. So like,
did you connect that to the Mao Zedong at all?
I didn't get there yet.
Okay.
The Mandate of Heaven alone has a lot of information, but you see how the Mandate of Heaven kind of was the cornerstone of Confucianism, and then Confucianism became like everything that the government is based off of today.
Yes. Which is interesting because you have seen in China a lot of several leaders try to separate from Confucianism, but then it always ends up coming right back.
The Mandate of Heaven.
Yeah, even with Deng, he tried to, and he did successfully go to the globalization and expansion part, but they still have these certain ties. You can't separate this culture and state. It's really hard to, because I think at the end of the day, it's if you look at one country compared to another, they're one state, one nation in a way that so they kind of need each other and bounce off each other. And then if you lose that kind of slight nationalism, or at least respect for progression or holding on to your stuff, then it kind of feels empty. So I guess to Danny's question, to answer that specifically, I don't know. I think there has to be that connection. I think if it completely separates, then it's a whole different place. Then you're not talking about Russia. You're talking about a different place. You're not talking about China. You're not talking about the U.S. It changes. Right. So yeah.
I was just gonna build off of what Patrick said. Like when you look at China, like I possibly couldn't imagine China without their religion as Confucianism and how that connects to their government. Not only like respect your parents and the elderly, but respect the people who are in charge, the officials who are above you. And I don't think that it would be the same kind of situation, kind of government that you see then. But I don't think many people, of course, besides the Hong Kong riots and protesters, I don't think many, let's say, middle-aged or above people are going to be out protesting against the government. So I definitely, to answer your question, I definitely think it's the same way Danny.
It's also the same in Spain as well. I mean, Spain, I know a lot of the elders there, a lot of them even like Franco if they were under there and in a richer area. And then some of the younger people are, of course, more progressive, liberal. They kind of, protest it. But at the end of the day, it still has the same kind of Spain value. It's still so.
And just real quick, just to kind of go into what I was saying before. One of the reasons why I brought that up is I wanted to kind of jog you guys to see, when you do like a narrow system like this, right? How much control do the people have over a government when you don't have a lot of options to pick from? We fight about the culture wars in the United States a lot, right? And yes, that matters. But our policy between left and right here in the United States is not very different. Especially economics policy, stuff like that. And it's the same in Russia and it's the same in China, where their policy doesn't change very frequently. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize that, because I want to say or formalize that I believe that these countries here try to control their political culture in a way that it benefits what the government wants to do rather than what the people want to do. Because as you see from the rise of leaders like Donald Trump, that obviously people are very sick of the corruption in the United States. And the United States is actively fighting against this urge, this revolutionary urge, by forming and controlling politics in the way it sees fit. And we're going to go into this in another episode where we talk about my guy, totally forgetting his name, Noam Chomsky, and his discussions on media in the United States and how it's used to control people. So I'm not gonna get into that now. I love that guy.
I think real quick with the Donald Trump thing, I think it will tie back into what we were saying earlier on. The Republican Democrat Party are just so large and there's so many subgroups that it doesn't even make sense at this point, in my opinion. Like Donald Trump, in a way, he's conservative. He actually did a lot of things for the conservative movement in all that area, very religious areas, kind of against abortion, all that. Sure. But I think his biggest push, which is like against corruption, draining the swamp, to me personally, that seems pretty progressive. To me,
it is. It's what you call populist. It's populist rhetoric.
That's what I'm saying. It's populist. I don't think that's conservative at all. I mean, and also he didn't grow up conservative either. He's from New York. So I think that's another reason why a lot of people want to say that he should have his own party, because a lot of these conservative people, all from all different, parts of their conservative spectrum, supported this big progressive kind of push. And people are so they don't understand the terms on what's progressive and what's not. It has to fit into a certain bubble. So I think that's something we would definitely go into in the next segment. But also also one last thing. I think we also have to ask the question if people even want to change. We talk about government control, but I think the question that can partially answer is, do people even want to change? A lot of people don't. A lot of people aren't comfortable with change. So, and some people are though. But I think it's the want to change is how you make it happen.
Maria, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna give Patrick a shout out because I like his background, and also I was gonna add that a lot of people wouldn't know this, but a lot of Donald Trump's policies and Bernie Sanders' policies align in certain ways with populism, of course. So it's kind of just differentiating like the right and the left wing, but it's still populism at its core. So it's definitely something I'd love to talk about at our next podcast. And to the question, like, do the people really want change? Like, I think we had many Donald Trump supporters. That's an understatement, and as well as Bernie supporters. So yeah, I think people do want to change.
Populism is the popular idea at the time.
Yeah. Danny talks about this a lot, actually. I mean, you talked about it in part in other segments as well. That's great, Maria. You have certain things that align it, and I think every single part of this segment has come full circle with that. So Christian, any last thoughts?
It always does. We always wrap it up nicely.
Yes, always.
I think that this is definitely a topic that we could probably explore in the next episode too more, because I feel like we didn't have enough time. But
Yeah.
I saw that. Just to close, I saw an article about how populism is rising in Europe as well. So we could connect this ending to the next episode as well. So I think we have our next episode set, so that's good. But that's all from us this week. Have a lovely weekend, and I will see all you next week.
Thank you. Stay
Peace.
toasty.
Later.